Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. I'm Eric, and this is Andy, and
Hello.
This is a little preview of what you're about to hear. We just kind of went for it, and
all kinds of interesting stuff. We talked about the sermons we're getting into. You're gonna, just to be honest, you're gonna have to bear with us a little at the beginning. I think we said this last time, but we had a technological hiccup. We talked a little bit about how we're playing some basketball. I guess consider yourself invited. We even talked about where we're playing, and then
right.
after that, we got into some. I think we got into some really interesting stuff about the Old Testament.
We did get into some interesting stuff.
Yeah, the Old Testament,
the New Testament, the Gospels.
Yeah, the biblical view of the end. We even, I tried to get into some talk about science.
Yeah, you gave a little like review on science, and we want to say to those people who review our show and say that it has low recording quality, we addressed that issue, and we may actually have upgraded in the near future to being really cool like everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. We're working on it. Anyway, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the show. Hang out with us for that first 5 minutes, and then it gets pretty interesting. Breakfast on a cloudy Tuesday in Tucson, Arizona, up in the loft of XO Coffee, where the cortados are delicious, the muffins are amazing, and the conversation's even better. I'm here. My name is Andy Littleton. I'm with Mission Church here in Tucson, Arizona, and Eric Deepen is sitting across the table from me. His coffee is almost gone. Mine's gone.
And we should say this is Faith Over Breakfast, where you and I just talk about what we would talk about if we hung out every week.
Yeah.
Which we did.
We
just stuck this mic in front of us.
That's right.
And then sometimes we act like this is a show. But it's not a show.
Yeah.
It's just you and me.
We actually are getting breakfast, and for whatever reason, we think that people might want to come with us, but they just can't. So we record it and put it on the interwebs.
There might be a little self-importance built into it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So maybe this show is about how we're sorry that we're so vain and thinking you would actually want to listen to this. But
61 people who
61. Man, imagine, that would just be, boy, it's good that we love you all, but
can you imagine all 61 in this loft listening to us talk? It would
not be good. Yeah. The conversation would go very differently if you were all here. So. Yeah.
So I heard, though, that one of my daughter's friends, who's a teenager, listened to our podcast, who's not a Christian, a little crazy. But you want to know what her or his, I don't remember what the gender was, but review of our show was?
Yeah. What was it?
It wasn't about the content, unfortunately.
Nothing about the content.
He said that the audio quality was subpar.
Well, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
We just wanted to acknowledge that we know
that.
And that it's on purpose.
Yeah, we're not trying to be clean and polished, because we're not, and we're just having breakfast.
And we want you to focus.
Right. Yeah.
What did he say?
Yeah, exactly. We tune in, The good news is today the speaker up on the loft is,
down.
Though sitting here, not on. And so we are thankful for that. That's been an interesting little curveball we've had the last couple weeks. Anyway, you all know we're pastors. Eric, we were kind of chatting away before we turned the mic on. We should have just turned the mic on 20 minutes ago, as is usually the case.
Yeah. We haven't been as good at, what do they call it, pre-show prep, or I don't know what that's called.
Part of that's because Tuesdays now I'm playing basketball.
I saw that, but you never invited me.
I did.
When did you invite me to come play basketball with you?
There was a group.
Again, did you send me another email? Is that what this is going to be about? It
probably was.
How did I get it?
Really?
No.
Because I promise you, I thought it, because I was like, I know Eric coaches and all this stuff.
I love playing basketball.
You want to come play basketball?
Yeah.
Tuesday and Thursday mornings, we're playing basketball at the Randolph Center.
How many people are there?
Well, today there were 5.
Wow. So you could have used me today, because you could have had 3 on 3.
We could have had 3 on 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, you should come. Anyway.
Randolph where?
So
Just right down the street. Well,
yeah,
kind of down the street.
Kind of down the street. Yeah, there's this
Do you have to
amazing
have a
basketball
membership?
court. So it's $1.50 if you don't have a membership.
Okay.
A membership, $88 a year.
Okay.
Tucson people, listen up to this. Listen up. And then, which works out to very little if you go once a week or more. And there's a workout room there too. If you want to use that, you can. Little workout room. But Mike, our worship leader, and I from the church, we saw that they were open early on Tuesday and Thursdays. So we dropped in on a Tuesday. There's full, big basketball gym, nice, temperature controlled, lights, everything. Nobody there.
Nobody there.
Every time
anybody ever been there?
In all the times we've gone, there has been one time in the morning where there's been somebody else.
And did he just join and play?
No, it was a guy and his son. I think they were prepping for a game or something. They were just kind of doing some little drills, and then they took off. But every other time they're open at 6:30 in the morning.
And are you there at 6:30 in the morning?
We are showing up. We're doing 7 to 8.
7 to 8
on Tuesday and Thursday mornings.
You don't look sweaty.
No,
Was it a light game?
I was a little sweaty. I rolled the windows down and drove here in the cool, and then I changed clothes.
Oh, okay. So you're going to have to change clothes. Okay.
You don't have. I mean, you
can I be
to.
sweaty and stinky? All right, I'll see you on Tuesday. I don't know if I can do Thursdays, but Tuesdays, yeah.
Oh man, perfect. This is great. Anyway,
All
wow,
right.
look at that. Hey, folks, look what just happened.
I might die on the court, but it'll be good.
Well, two of the guys that were there today were new to the game and haven't been playing much, and you could tell as first little game we played, they were pretty winded, and I was feeling that way. But just like 4 weeks into this, I'm
started
feeling
less
better.
winded.
Yeah, which is a nice.
Yeah, well, I've been looking
change.
for an outlet.
Oh man. Yeah.
All right,
do it anyway.
Old man basketball.
Old man basketball. It's great. Yeah, we got another guy from another church coming out. So Mike put something out too to like try to. He was like, "Hey, maybe some people, church leaders here will show up." So one did today, which is cool. Yeah. Anyway.
All right, I'll be there. Wow, long talk about how I'm going to be a basketball.
Man, yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Aren't you glad you tuned into Faith Over Breakfast?
Faith Over Breakfast.
See, that just happened. That's real talk right there.
That is real
radio.
talk.
Anyway, so yeah,
so
what's my point?
Well, we were going to say something about, like, we're actually going to have a serious show, you and I, next week on sexual harassment and subjects probably surrounding that, to kind of re-dive in there and address things that are happening and how we operate in culture as followers of Jesus. Yeah, we're going to go into that. We've had that requested specifically, and next week it is, of course. There's so much going around. So we're going to come at it from, hey, we're pastors. How do we want to unpack? Well, there was just a little freak out moment we had where it was sure looking like, what it was looking like to me was like we weren't recording, but apparently we were. There might be a funny little moment in here for you all. Where, I'll try to edit something.
Yeah.
I don't hardly ever edit our show either, so there's no polish.
As we're just talking, there's no polish. Yeah. Hey, your daughter's friend who thinks the quality's poor, it's going to be worse.
It's going to be
one's worse.
Yeah, it's going to be worse today.
Anyway, so we're going to dive into sexual harassment next week, which is that's a hard one. So that'll be
not looking forward to that.
Never is that. That should not be interesting or fun.
No,
but hopefully helpful.
So we were talking about sermon series.
Yeah, so we're both going to be preaching the Old Testament. So what I think people from our churches listen to this. So what are you, when you're thinking about, you're getting ready to preach Daniel, and at our church we're going to preach through the first 5 books of the Bible thematically, and so what worries you about that? What's hard about that? What's different about that? What are you looking forward to about that? And
Well, what worries me about it is that it's a large narrative covering a large span of time, and once you start and you decide your theme,
there's no going back.
A lot of times when you're in the middle, I mean, you can make the adjustment, but if you're trying to help people kind of walk through the book, you're stuck. You got to go with what you got. So that's kind of a little scary headed into Daniel, whereas, Paul, anything Pauline is already laid out for you. You're just doing some variations. Yeah, they're just big sermons, written for you. So
it sure is different. Yeah.
And it feels like, maybe this is untrue, but it feels like the Gospels are pretty laid out for you too. So there's a lot of fun things to do with the Gospels, but you're never going to drift off of the main, trajectory to the cross and to the resurrection. That's where we're headed, and then you're just enjoying Jesus' life and his parables and trying to massage those into people. So then you hit the Old Testament. Oh no,
because clearly the Gospels, and maybe some of our folks haven't thought about this, but they weren't written. It wasn't like Matthew's walking along with Jesus and he's going, "Oh, I'm going to take a chronology of this guy's life. I'm his biographer now."
Right.
He's looking back because they didn't. From what we can tell, they don't know what they're dealing with. They don't realize what's happening here to the level of what's going on. And so then they're looking back and they're writing Jesus' story, but they are all writing it to different audiences, but they're saying, hey, like, I'm starting here, I'm ending here, I'm proving a point that this is the long-awaited Savior, Redeemer of Israel, who's also the hope of the world. And so they're it's all coming full circle, those books. And that's, I would say, like Paul's letters, a little different, but he's kind of saying, it is like sermons. It's saying something to the effect of, like, here are truths, here's how they play out. But he's bringing that whole thought together, whereas some of these Old Testament books, a lot of them aren't doing that. They weren't written that way for that purpose, so it's just very different.
Interesting side note to the gospel idea is, I heard recently that over the last 40 years there's been a change in secular historians' understanding of the gospel, so that if you were in, say, the mid-70s to say you believe that Jesus even was real, died on the cross and rose from the dead, you're either Catholic or a fundamentalist Christian. Whereas now about 75% of historians will say that it is that Jesus was born, died, and rose from the dead as historic fact, even if they don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. But
they'll say it's a recorded historical event.
Yes, and because of the way we've changed the criticism, instead of coming at it like from an apologetic approach, even from the secular world, saying like this is just a religious fable, and changing and looking at it as historic documents and putting it under that kind of scrutiny, they've had to say, these are facts and these are things that are documentable and these things happened. Which I thought was really fascinating, because it's a change in the way scholarship is being done, not just in the religious circles, but outside in the university, how they're approaching literature and how they're forced to say, okay, like, these are things we have to deal with because we want to know what's happening in the first century. And these are very key documents to helping us understand that.
Wow.
It's really fascinating.
And they absolutely are. I mean, I don't think you can't study that era and ignore. I mean, this is probably one of the most thorough and vast, sets of legitimate historical documents you have, and here it's all, and there's all this stuff about this guy, Jesus, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. And interesting things like, some of the things that historians talk about now is the fact that obviously the women in all four accounts are testify first, which is incredible. Which is an incredible thing. Yeah. The fact that he was said where he was buried in Jerusalem, so you can go check it out. Like in that early time, you could go and see if he was there or not. Like,
this is a place. This is a known location.
If you wanted to really fabricate it, you would have put it in Rome. He would have died in Rome. Where you can't find him, like the tomb being empty. Like you can go visit it. So there's some interesting things that you just wouldn't normally do if you were trying to fabricate things. There's a lot of things in there. So I just thought it was fascinating.
Absolutely,
the historians are kind of moving in that direction.
Yeah, with how public these documents were and how widespread they were, there would have been an absolute outcry, and there'd be a large body of literature debunking all of this if it were just absolute ridiculous. And of course, there were people who disagreed. But even the scriptural gospels tell you that people said, no, he didn't rise from the dead. His body was stolen. They tell you that people thought that.
Right. Well, there's internal
criticism.
Yes. Most of the ones that we would bring against it, the Bible also brings against it.
Yeah, they say, here, there's a group of people that say this. Instead of going like, no, everybody agrees. And so, it's maybe we should do a whole podcast on that stuff too.
Yeah, I think we should at some point, because I think there's a lot. Like, I think a lot of us don't realize that we're studying a text that is giving us very crazy things. Like, we are talking about, like I said in my
unbelievable
sermon,
things. Right?
God decides to grow up in the tummy of not a tummy literally, but in the womb of a woman. So for 9 months, God was in a womb. Like, that in itself is crazy.
That's wild.
But very reasonable to hold on to and believe. So it's really cool that the miraculous and the rational come together in our faith. And the historically valid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah. So I guess here we are talking about the New Testament and how great and on all this, but what is it? So we're going to do this thematic thing through the Old Testament. I've actually, in our whole, I've been at church planting since 2014, and only done one portion, not even a whole Old Testament book, but one portion of the Old Testament in that amount of time.
Oh, really?
And part of that was because it felt like in our group, that there was that we needed to root ourselves in some things that were in the New Testament. And then we did early on. We did Hebrews, which pulled in a lot of truths, and we were looking back to the Old Testament a lot. But I remember when we did this one portion, I was like, whoa! I had this feeling, like this is written so different. Like, this is such a different type of text to teach. And yeah, it was interesting. Like, just to be honest, I was like, man, I can't wait till we're done with this. This is harder. And I've heard such things, but to actually experience it. So you've been at this way longer than me.
Long time.
How much Old Testament have you?
Well, see, and probably you'll kind of resonate with this, but when I started, like, I had a lot of rules. Rod and I had rules, and so we had this rule that was this: we didn't do any topical studies.
Right.
So it was all going to be books of the Bible.
Yeah.
So the rule was we started with an Old Testament books. We planned our church out of Hosea. So then from Hosea, you had to have a New Testament letter. So we went to a letter.
Yeah.
From the letter, you had to go to a Old Testament narrative. So from the Old Testament narrative, you had to go to a gospel.
Man, the rules, guys.
Yes. So we basically did prophet, epistle, narrative, gospel, prophet.
Yeah.
That's how we would run it. And so we did a lot of Old Testament. I've preached on a lot of Old Testament books. We have avoided a particular number of books, such as Lamentations, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah.
Yeah.
The bigger ones that I am terrified to, and makes it harder because do I want to spend 3 years on Isaiah?
Right.
So that's kind of where and then as we've matured, we drop the rules.
Is that how it works?
Oh, I think you begin to realize that you can't force everybody into a particular thing.
Right.
But it was really helpful in learning to do that. But but you're saying, like, you're going to do these major things in 5 books.
5 books.
So you're talking about the Pentateuch, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you can start in Genesis, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. How many, is this all year?
It's for the year next year.
So how many stories have you thought are you going to do out of Genesis?
I could pull it up on my computer, but I should say the bulk of the year will come from Genesis and Exodus.
Okay.
And I want to say that might be 3/4.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you'll do a little in Deuteronomy.
And then we'll hit like major stuff about. I mean, there's a lot of repeats, like where you see law, grace, justice, different these themes that come up over and over.
Right.
And so we're going to go at it kind of like explaining these themes that are just regular, that are really key to understanding the New Testament and the gospel, and showing that here they are in the Old Testament over and over and over, in these major narratives, the stories we remember from childhood that maybe we, I don't know, the famous one for me is, Noah and the Ark, that I don't think I understood at all. As a child, I was like, I love animals, and then look how happy they are,
And Jesus saved the animals.
And Jesus saved the animals. Isn't that cool? Except that not very many were saved, and a lot of people, and it's a judgment, and it's a really pretty horrific moment and story, and I, so like, not that we want to be horrific, but we want to deal with what's there, kind of realizing a lot of our folks, as as with us, as if this weren't our job,
yes,
a lot of our, we wouldn't be spending as much time looking back on some of that stuff. They're like, I grew up knowing that. Mm-hmm. And then, there's a lot of people in our church that did not grow up knowing that.
You're right.
And you don't tend to start there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if have you watched any of the Bible Project?
Yes. Very good.
And I think
yeah.
Yes, incredible in helping people see the breadth of Old Testament books.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been reading the Old Testament since I was a little kid, and watching those videos was informative to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, so that's, I have been trying to think through even just ways to use those in our community to help people see the big picture. Yeah,
I think we're thinking, you and I were talking a little bit about this before, of, maybe there's some study, because since we're going to do such big thematic stuff, it'd be good to invite our people to be reading these books along with us, behind the scenes, thinking about what's there, since we're only going to be able to touch on so much on a given Sunday. But that was another thing that came up, was potentially sharing those Bible Project videos for people to, throughout the week, kind of leading up to, or after a sermon, when one was available that touched on one of these themes or one of these books, to say, hey, go check this out, because we're going to be doing a very flyover view of this idea, and showing how it applies to our lives, and you really need to look into it deeper. But here's one way to look at the whole picture of this book, and then why don't you, if you have time, if you're able, go ahead and read it too over the next however many months.
Well, I think when you head into the Old Testament, it's an interesting question, because you're going to be looking at judgment a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And rules and laws and justice.
Yeah. It's all there.
And
there's a lot of grace there.
And it's blood.
A lot of grace there, yeah.
So how do you take a series like this and help people who maybe know nothing about God, or are new, or trying to figure out who Jesus is and who this all is, and they walk into your church and you're in, the Tower of Babel. You're, and all of a sudden we're finding out God's confused the languages, and it seems really weird. How do you think about that missionally for you?
Well, that's precisely, what the preaching and the Sundays of our, not Sunday, but what the sermons are for, is to take this idea and say, look, here's a big thing that we learn about God. This is true. This was true then. It's true now. And then bringing it down to say, breaking it down to say, so here's what we need to know, and here's how this impacts us, and this problem is still in the world, and here's how it's solved, and here's how we're a part of that. And then, because if all we do is just retell the story, from the Bible, just the way, here's what happened. Oh my gosh, can you believe it? Look at this craziness. That's not going to be very helpful for people. I think they can read it and come away with all that. So we're going to have to work hard. That's going to be Nick and I and whoever else preaches during the year. We're going to have to work very hard to ask that question of, what does this theme, how can this theme be applied to us now? How is this theme something that the world needs to understand? How is this theme something that we must know and understand as we walk out into the world? Even when I'm thinking of how we're going to talk about sexual harassment next week, talk about judgment, and it dawned on me the other day that, we've got people who are being there. If we never saw them again, if their body of work was never experienced again, we're culturally very happy for them to be dead to us.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it's this isn't judgment, isn't such a far away theme. Matt Lauer isn't going to be hung, but
for all intents and purposes, he's become a pariah.
He is dead to us.
There are many pariahs.
Yeah.
Now he may find these and I don't know how it is in more the liberal end of things, but in the conservative end of things, they may find their subgroups, but they become a pariah to the larger community.
Yeah, and so I don't think it's so distant. And of course, like that's the whole premise of why we still study the Old Testament is these things. Yeah, this was the ancient world, and I believe there's some ways in which God interacted with ancient people who had their thinking was different, their approach to learning was different. But these human elements, these truths about humanity, I don't believe have changed, and I think we can easily exhibit that in our preaching and show why the New Testament's so important and why Jesus is so important.
Right.
That's my take on it. I don't know. How are you doing that with? You're going through one book.
We're going through Daniel, which is, the probably the last book of the Old Testament, because when Jesus was there, they were still arguing over Daniel, and in fact, probably in where Jesus was in Jerusalem, they didn't accept Daniel as part of the canon. It was still in debate, depending how far away you were from the center.
Yeah.
So this is a book that's very contemporary.
Yeah.
Because things that are contemporary are 300 years old or whatever in the ancient world. Not like contemporary for us is yesterday and 3 days before that.
Yeah, because our news cycle is 4 hours long, and that was not the case at all.
No, and so that's a book so he references it a lot. Yeah. I mean, his favorite pet name for himself, Son of Man, is a Daniel thing. Yeah. So, and and it's so there's some fascinating things in that. But I think when I preach on the Old Testament and think about the Old Testament, and you read those narratives where God sends people in to wipe entire nations out. Well, one, I don't believe that they wiped the whole nations out. I think the narrative is very hyperbolic. They went in and they wiped a bunch of people out, and they were told to. And there's some certain circumstances where maybe the whole places were wiped out. But you can see historically, they were told to wipe them out. It said they were wiped out, and then they're over here. So some people got. So it's not. These are all symbolic actions, and you think, man, God is just harsh. But then you begin to read in His prophets and in the Psalms, like His heart for His people. And the heart for the world is the nations is so prevalent, and the weeping of God and the angst of God over this, just the ugliness of the narrative, that you start realizing, okay, this is a human story that is inspired and given to us. This is it's this beautiful tapestry of brokenness and God's intervention as ancient people understand God in the midst of a plethora of gods and demonic and spiritual insanity and you're talking about we like external infanticide, like just the wiping out of children, and you think about, I remember in my humanities class in college when the professor, who was not a Christian, said, or a Jew, said, this is the moment when society changed, when Abraham climbed up the mountain to kill his son and decides not to kill his son. We can trace how, child sacrifice began to change historically from this moment. And I was like, so this is a huge announcement from, that the Jewish people, like the beginning of the Jewish nation, which is Abraham, and the Muslim community, like there's that moment where value of a child is established in a powerful way. So there are just amazing moments like that in the Old Testament where you're just like, oh, wow, this is exciting. Yeah. I don't know, how God intervenes that way gets me all excited and choked up, and
I was asking you before. So the Book of Daniel, is one that when people think about the end, there's a couple books that come up. And Daniel's a big one on that note, and so I was asking you kind of how do you view the end, like God, if all of this is directed and there's a God over history, how do things end, and what's your kind of take on that generally? There's some names for all this stuff, but I think, I think, I don't know what your guys' statement as a church is, but it really is for us. Ours is one I think it's a sentence or two sentences in our
statements of belief, which is that we believe that Jesus will return victorious and make all things new.
Ours is very similar to that.
Because the complexity of that, I mean, you look at these great scholars who had some sense of when the Messiah was going to come, and Jesus shows up on the scene and nobody recognizes him as the Messiah.
That's something I feel you must keep in mind. Is one thing that Scripture evidences is that very few to zero experts were right.
Yes.
When Jesus came to earth,
right.
So it, in the return of Christ that's spoken of in the Scriptures, should we expect the vast majority of experts or somebody like that to have figured this out? No, probably not. And would it come about in a way that would surprise us? As in, Jesus, who they see, the conquering king's going to return, and he returns meek and suffering, or he arrives meek and suffering and as a baby, and in all these ways that they didn't expect and that they kind of rejected. So might we similarly misunderstand in a number of directions? I would say we have to keep in the back of our minds, yes, we might misunderstand.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe, we talked about, do I believe that the tribulation started and as soon as Jesus ascended? Yes. Yeah. We are in the tribulation. We have been for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Do I believe in the rapture? Not like everybody else.
Right.
Because I believe the rapture is a greeting of the king who is coming he's coming. When the rapture happens, Jesus will be on the earth establishing his kingdom. We're not going, it's like what N.T. Wright says, if you're going to heaven, you're only going to be there a short time.
Yeah. Right.
Because God's kingdom has come to earth. Now my time is to dwell with men. This is...
Yeah, there's also there's new heavens and new earth. There's a new Jerusalem. There's a restoration. That seems, I feel like that's the general consensus these days is getting back to that.
Yeah,
it kind of went. There was a long period of time where it was very ethereal. And,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe some biblical scholars will scoff at this, but from my experience and what I've read, it really, until the mid-1800s, the idea of dispensationalism...
that's a very new idea.
All very new. Now, there were certainly aspects of it within historic Christianity, but mostly it was not there.
I would venture to say almost dispensationalism really not there. So for our folks who are listening who are going, wait, what's that?
What?
So dispensationalism is an idea really created. I mean, I think you could link it back to a guy named Charles Ryrie and a study Bible that he wrote, and it's the idea that history is broken up into 7 distinct periods in which God saves in 7 distinct ways, and really they all were intended to work and in some way or shape or form. Failed to work. I think he might say behind the scenes, maybe God knew that. Maybe I'm unclear on that from his perspective. But there were 7 different modes of saving, and that the 6th one had to do with Jesus of Nazareth, who came, and then the 7th one is really kind of a war on the earth in which the nation state of Israel is reinstated. And this is, you wouldn't believe, especially in America, how much this impacts politics and people's views. So when you adopt this idea that the nation state of Israel is going to be reestablished and that's how God's going to restore his reign, well then politically you're going to support anything that supports Israel in the Middle East.
Right.
And so a lot of what's kind of seeped into our political scenery and has to do with dispensationalism. So don't forget, religious ideas have massive importance.
They do,
and you can't just get rid of religion and get rid of that. You have to really seek truth. But a scriptural examination of dispensationalism falls flat.
I would agree.
And there
are too many charts and graphs.
There are so many charts and graphs. But we could go on and on. But this has become very prominent in the evangelical church, and it might be one of the most damaging. I mean, I would venture to say, heresies that the church has latched onto that's really derailed our views on things.
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, and I feel like for me, I personally have to be careful because I don't want to speak in authority over that. Because in some senses, I mean, I have a lot of people, even probably listening,
probably are, and I'm sure there are people in our church. Well, I grew up assuming it.
Yes.
Because the churches I grew up in assumed it, and the Left Behind books came out, and I went, "Oh, these are biblically based." Well, biblically through the lens of dispensationalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and they also, oddly enough, come out of how you believe your salvation is. Can you lose that salvation?
Yep.
Do you have the will to choose that salvation? Like it is a very self-empowering theology. So it's man-centered, not God-centered.
So it's like you've got to be ready and right with God when this rapture shows up.
Terrifying because
holy cow,
growing up with that, you thought. Well, I mean, you don't know how many times I prayed the prayer.
I remember a nightmare about it. Yeah,
of like salvation because I was like, well, I did this yesterday, and am I doing my saves? I need to I don't know how many times I asked Jesus into my heart, quote unquote.
Because the big fear is like any second now, people are going to get sucked off the earth, and then you start to study into that in the scriptures, and you go, wait, where is that? Like,
right.
I mean, there's a return of Christ,
right,
where all of his people are swept up to him and joined with him, but. Anyway, and I know there's a long debate, and there's some verses that people will pull out. There's some really great scholarship out there. I'd recommend Greg Beale. I'd recommend Tom Schreiner. I'd recommend a whole lot of folks that you should, go read and study. And there's some good work done on why those passages are not referring to some of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyway,
that's a sidetrack.
That is a sidetrack, but I assume a lot of people are interested, and you're going to start to step into some of those scriptures in Daniel that bring up those questions.
Yeah, and we'll have to address those when we hit it.
Yeah, yeah. So in your view, the next step is Christ returns victorious.
Yes.
Right? Yep.
That's my view.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah, and I think
and the reign is on the earth.
The reign is on the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have some weird views about it that are not like, oh, this is my church. But personally, where I believe that part of the new earth and the new heavens are not an instantaneous thing, that I actually think we as the people of God are going to be called with the power of God to, in the light of Christ and the new Adam, like being what Adam and Eve were supposed to be, that we'll be able to go and restructure a place and bring healing to a people that may not be part of the kingdom. I don't know how that all is going to look, but I think God has this constant restoring experience or intention, and now we're going to partner in that in a new way and in a different way. And I don't understand what that's going to look like or how it's going to look.
There's a lot of mystery behind that. The thing that I tend to, on a similar, maybe a little different note, is, and this is one of those things I can't prove, but I kind of feel might be underneath some of these ideas, is the idea that the good work that we do now might continue forward. That it's not all lost. And I get some of that from, the idea of what some of the things Jesus said about, people being saved and their work being tested and things like that. And I don't think that just means work as in like, oh, are you moral and your morality being tested? Right. But because I don't think Jesus was, and I don't think the scriptures speak in such segmented ways about what we do and what we build and what we create and who we are. I think those are all tied together, and they definitely seem to be tied together in the ancient literature. What the land you cultivate and the things that you build have a lot to do. They come out of who you are and out of your morals, and out of your heart toward God, and so I sort of. Though I would never claim to know quite how that works, but I would say I don't think the work that we do here, scripturally speaking, is just like, oh, then it's all gone,
right?
And now we're in a paradise.
Well, and I think like what you're saying, like, it has a lot to do with relationship with God, and so in the sense that, like, I'm developing a relationship now, and when the end comes, and when you step in, your relationship with God and my relationship with God are instantaneously becomes the same.
Right.
Like, we're going to have a different relationship with God, and you may have a deeper intimacy in areas with God that I don't because of what happened in your life. Right. Like, you're developing a story with God that's going to continue, not all of a sudden we're all equal in the...
And we all are just know and are known the same, and we become kind of monotonous units that don't have personalities. Right. And
I think the thing that we just all have that's similar is we have access to the throne room of God.
Yeah. And I think
Jesus' righteousness.
And I think all of that is ultimately based on the fact that there's a triune God for all eternity. So there's... never in eternity has it been just a monotonous, existence. There's always been a unity of diverse persons. And so then he created diverse persons. He will reunify with himself and with each other diverse persons.
Right.
Which means they're going to, I don't know what to do with like that. I can't comprehend it, but that's an exciting thought.
It is an exciting thought.
And that makes, eternity with God, it's like, because then it's going, the things that we experience here that are good and beautiful and true would actually be cleansed and refined and perfected and go on.
Right.
And the things that are broken here that destroy that break unity, that corrupt it, that cause diversity to be divisive, and all those things will be undone and will be removed, and we'll get to experience the way things were supposed to be. Right.
Which is interesting because I don't think that will mean that there isn't adversity. In the sense that...
I don't know.
I think it means, I think that there might still be a wildness to the new earth and a wildness to the new heavens that are to be tamed together.
Yeah, and I
don't think that we're going to go tame it and you're going to get crushed under the rock and we're all going to mourn that you died in this process.
Right.
I think that's the difference. I think, yes, I think that we are now called to do things, but we don't have to worry about death in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, when my dad died and we talked about that, or when we heard he was going to die, and we talked about the passage in Isaiah where no longer will an old man not live out his years. Even in things like that, you're thinking, wait, like it sounds like someone's aging.
Right.
Right. And so there's some interesting stuff to grapple with and all that, and probably to admit that we don't understand how would that work. How would there be infants who will not die in the new heavens, new earth? Or is that portion of Isaiah, is it in that moment, is it talking about something, literal and local, and then it's some of the language points forward, or is there a lot we don't understand about the new heavens and new earth? And I would venture
probably a little
bit of all that. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I think it's just the metaphors of the ancient times too, just giving out like this sense of vitality and
they weren't feeling like they needed to report things with perfect accuracy. And can truth be told through such metaphors?
Yeah,
absolutely. And we want things to be like scientific facts, and we don't even know what science is. We don't even know what facts are. That's problematic.
Yeah, that was a problematic statement too.
Yeah, can I give you my definition of science just for fun?
Okay.
I want to know what you think of this. I get this from a philosopher I read. Science is the classification and measuring of things that we can observe using the categories that we've created.
Yes. I like that. It's good.
So at the end of the day, if our categories are just our own created ideas,
yes,
what do we really know?
Yeah. We can only suggest that we might know some things.
We can classify and calculate the things we can see with the categories we've created.
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh, and then that's when it comes into philosophically just what's reasonable to believe and what's not reasonable to believe.
Right. Now we got to get the philosopher back on, right?
Well,
I actually have I have an appointment in 15 minutes, my friend.
Yeah.
So
let's sign off. It's good to see all you guys.
Yeah.
I didn't see any of you, so.
Well, good to know that you'll hear us. Thank you, and see you next week.